Railroads and the Wild West, how the Iron Horse transformed America. Ah, the Wild West. A land of endless plains, rugged mountains, and a horizon so far away it might as well be another planet. A place where the tumbleweeds roll, the cowboys roam, and the saloon doors swing with the tales of outlaws and lawmen. But have you ever wondered what really tamed this wild, untamed land? Spoiler alert, it wasn't a six-shooter or a sheriff with a shiny star. It was something far more powerful, relentless, and, dare I say, ironclad, the railroad. Welcome, folks, to a journey back in time, where we'll uncover how the Transcontinental Railroad, affectionately known as the Iron Horse, galloped its way across America, transforming the Wild West from a lawless frontier into the bustling heart of the American dream. Buckle up, because this is one ride you won't want to miss. Section 1, Setting the Stage, America Before the Railroad. Picture this, it's the mid-1800s, and the United States is like a teenager who just discovered the joys of a growth spurt. The country is expanding, stretching its limbs from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But here's the catch, the heart of this vast land is like a no-man's land. Sure, there's the Oregon Trail, and yeah, some folks have ventured westward in wagons, but it's a risky, grueling affair. Crossing the plains is more of a death wish than a journey, and let's not even talk about the mountains. The Rocky Mountains weren't just a hurdle, they were more like a do not pass go, do not collect $200 card in the game of Manifest Destiny. The East was bustling with industry, while the West was a wild, wild world, rich in resources but isolated by the sheer impossibility of reaching it in one piece. The promise of gold, silver, and fertile land was enough to make even the most cautious souls consider the trek. But there was no easy way to get there. America needed something big, fast, and strong, to tie its sprawling territories together. And that's when the Iron Horse trotted onto the scene. Section 2, Birth of the Railroad, Dreams of Steel and Steam. Now, let's talk about ambition, real, crazy, American ambition. The idea of a railroad stretching from coast to coast was the stuff of dreams in the 1830s and 40s. But by the 1860s, those dreams were becoming blueprints. The government, with a bit of arm twisting and a healthy dose of bribery, persuasion, decided that it was high time to connect the Atlantic to the Pacific with steel and steam. Enter the Pacific Railway Act of 1862. This was more than just a piece of paper, it was the green light for one of the greatest engineering feats in history. Two companies, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, were handed the monumental task of laying tracks from opposite ends of the continent and meeting somewhere in the middle. Simple, right? Well, not exactly. On one side, the Union Pacific started in Omaha, Nebraska, a place that, let's be honest, wasn't exactly the gateway to the West. They had to cross the Great Plains, fight off the occasional bison herd, and deal with Native American tribes who weren't exactly thrilled about a giant iron snake cutting through their lands. On the other side, the Central Pacific began in Sacramento, California. Their biggest challenge? The Sierra Nevada Mountains, a mountain range so formidable that it made Everest look like a hillock in comparison. The race was on, with each company laying track as fast as humanly possible, spurred on by the promise of land grants and government bonds. The more track they laid, the more land they got, and let's just say, there were some, creative bookkeeping methods involved. Section 3, The Railroad Meets the Wild West, Transformation Begins. Now, let's talk about what happened when this Iron Horse finally started chugging across the West. First off, it was nothing short of a revolution. Suddenly, the West was no longer some distant, mythical land. It was accessible, reachable, and ripe for the picking. The journey that once took months by wagon now took mere days by train. Imagine the shock of settlers, traders, and miners when they realized they could now travel to the West in the time it used to take to have a proper shave. But it wasn't just the travel time that changed, the railroad brought with it the full force of industrialization. Towns sprang up along the tracks like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Places like Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Ogden, Utah went from sleepy outposts to booming hubs of activity almost overnight. The railroad wasn't just a mode of transportation, it was the lifeblood of a new, connected America. However, not everyone was thrilled. Native American tribes, whose lands were now crisscrossed by steel rails, saw the railroad as an invasion. The Iron Horse didn't just bring settlers, it brought soldiers, hunters, and a wave of destruction to their traditional way of life. The buffalo, a vital resource for many plains tribes, were hunted to near extinction, often from the windows of passing trains. The railroad, for all its progress, was also a harbinger of conflict and change that would forever alter the West. Section 4, The Workers, Blood, Sweat, and Steel. While we're here, let's not forget the real heroes of this story, the workers. Building the Transcontinental Railroad wasn't a job for the faint of heart. It was grueling, backbreaking labor, and it was done by a diverse workforce that rarely gets the spotlight. Thousands of Irish immigrants worked for the Union Pacific, laying track across the Great Plains under the blazing sun. Meanwhile, on the Central Pacific side, Chinese laborers, who were often paid less and given the most dangerous tasks, blasted through the Sierra Nevadas with little more than black powder and sheer determination. These workers faced unimaginable hardships, extreme weather, dangerous working conditions, and even attacks by bandits and hostile tribes. But they kept going, driven by the promise of wages, a better life, or, in many cases, just the hope of surviving another day. The completion of the railroad in 1869, when the two lines met at Promontory Summit in Utah, was as much a testament to their resilience as it was to American ingenuity. Section 5, The Aftermath, A New West is Born. So, what happened after the Golden Spike was driven in, and the East met the West in a symbolic handshake of steel? Well, the West was never the same again. The railroad opened up the region to settlers, and with them came farms, ranches, and eventually, entire cities. The Wild West was tamed, or at least, it started to be. The lawlessness didn't disappear overnight. After all, you can't just slap a railroad down and expect everyone to play nice. But the days of the open range, of cattle drives and boomtowns, were numbered. The economy boomed, but so did the inequalities. The railroad companies, now flush with power and land, became some of the most influential entities in the country. They could make or break towns with the simple decision of where to lay tracks. And while the railroad brought prosperity to many, it also entrenched the power of the few. For Native Americans, the railroad was a catastrophe. The promise of manifest destiny had come at a terrible cost, as their lands were divided, their resources depleted, and their way of life irrevocably changed. The iron horse that promised progress also delivered devastation. Conclusion: the legacy of the railroad. So, what's the legacy of the Transcontinental Railroad? It's a tale of two sides, really. On one hand, it's the story of progress, of the indomitable spirit of a nation that dared to dream big and succeeded in connecting a continent. On the other hand, it's a story of conflict, of the people and cultures that were swept aside in the name of that progress. The railroad transformed the Wild West into a place where anything seemed possible, a land of opportunity for some and a land of loss for others. It's a reminder that history is rarely simple. It's a mix of triumph and tragedy, of dreams realized and dreams shattered. And as we look back on the legacy of the Iron Horse, it's clear that it left a mark on America that's still felt today. So the next time you hear that distant whistle or see a train barreling down the tracks, remember the story of the railroad and the Wild West, a story of how steel and steam changed the course of history. That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this ride through history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. And if you've got a hankering for more, leave a comment below about what you'd like to see next. Until then, keep those spurs sharp, and we'll see you in the next adventure.